Discussing Plato is already complicated. It's true that behind the Greek philosopher who founded Western thought, there's also an air of strangeness. Things only get more complicated when we consider that Plato was also the architect of one of the most enduring mysteries in human history, Atlantis. Although some claim that it had already been mentioned much earlier in other texts, the truth is that the most iconic reference to this supposed lost island is found in the dialogues of Timaeus and Critias, written around the year 360 before Christ, by the most famous disciple of Socrates. In those dialogues, Plato puts in the mouths of his characters a conversation that seems academic, but with unexpected consequences. Critias recounts how his ancestor, the wise Solon, visited Egypt centuries ago, the land of massive pyramids and animal-headed gods. There, the priests of the Temple of Neith in the city of Sais would have revealed to him a secret jealously guarded in their millennia-old archives. More than 9,000 years ago, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, there was a colossal island. A fertile land, abundant in resources and home to beings as powerful as they were refined. They would have achieved an evolution beyond what the peoples of those times could have imagined. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The world was divided in two from the start. For some, the story was a brilliant example of how Plato used narrative to illustrate his philosophical ideas. Atlantis, they thought, was a warning in the form of an allegory. For others, the hidden story has always concealed something more. A memory perhaps distorted by a real catastrophe, or evidence that history, as we know it, is a fraud. It didn't help calm the waters of the debate that what Plato told about Atlantis was left suggestively unfinished. Was an essential part of those writings lost? Is there still a hidden part of the whole matter? And those questions are just the tip of the iceberg. Whatever the case, what began as a philosophical anecdote in a conversation between sophists became one of humanity's greatest unresolved archaeological mysteries. What was Atlantis like, according to what was written? With which other civilizations could it have been confused? According to some historians, if it did exist, where are its remains supposed to be? How was it linked to the Bermuda Triangle? Who were the spiritualists that mentioned it in their works and for what purposes? To answer these and other questions, let's embark on this adventure where we'll explore the most enigmatic aspects of Atlantis. Before we start, I want to say this topic is broad, so we decided to cover, let's say, the most important points, different theories, and various topics that have been discussed. We tried to cover as much as possible, but could we make a 5-hour video about Atlantis? Absolutely. If you like this kind of video, write the word specials down below, and we'll keep making these specials that come out every Sunday. If you haven't seen them, we've uploaded many to this channel. If you like cryptozoology, if you like mysteries, all that stuff, check out the channel because there are a lot of specials uploaded. And I also invite you to suggest the special you like. We'll be reading all your comments down below. I also want to tell you that we've enabled new memberships for the channel. From now on, we have only one level. And with that membership, your name will appear at the end of videos to thank you for supporting the channel. Plus, you'll get early video access, 24, 48, or 72 hours ahead, and one exclusive video each month. I'm promising this now, though I may not keep it, but I'll keep everything else. Regarding the exclusive video, it's probably fine and very cheap. The membership mainly symbolizes support for the channel and helps us continue. These 1-hour videos that not many people make on YouTube, they're hard to find and that's it. I think we try to put a lot of quality, a lot of research into them, and I think you all like it, so we'd like to keep going. I won't keep you any longer. Let's get started. Plato said Atlantis was founded by Poseidon, who fell in love with the mortal Clito. To protect her and ensure his descendants, Poseidon surrounded the hill where Clito lived, with a series of canals and rings of water, creating an island that combined natural beauty and strength. This island was Atlantis' sacred, powerful heart. From the union of Poseidon and Clito, 10 children were born, who became the first kings of Atlantis. Poseidon divided the kingdom into 10 parts, granting each son the rule of a region, but maintaining the supremacy of the firstborn. This political structure formed a confederation of united kingdoms under a monarchical system with a strong sense of loyalty and hierarchy. Each of these kings had his own capital and lands, but they gathered in a council to make important decisions that affected all of Atlantis. The entire island was divided into fertile regions, mountains rich in minerals, and vast plains. Atlantis features impressive architecture and advanced technology. For their time, the Atlanteans built temples of marble and gold, hydraulic systems that allowed them to control the waters, and ports capable of receiving large fleets. Their fields were abundant, and their trade extended across vast territories, making them an unrivaled power. Their wildlife was equally astonishing, especially the enormous elephants. However, over time, according to the story, Atlantis fell into corruption and greed. Its kings and inhabitants began to forget the virtues that Poseidon had wanted to instill, seeking domination and conquest instead of balance and justice. This moral decline led to internal conflicts and wars with other nations. The Atlanteans tried to conquer Asia, Libya, and Greece itself. It was then that the Athenians rose up against them. With courage and wisdom, they repelled the invasion, not without first being part of a total bloodbath. The disappointed gods decided to punish the Atlanteans, and that punishment manifested as a cataclysm that sank Atlantis into the sea. In a single day and night of disaster, that civilization was erased from the earth forever. Though mythological, this story serves as a symbolic model inspiring interpretations of power, corruption, and society's fate. Atlantis, as a kingdom founded by a god and ruled by a confederation of kings, represents the initial balance that is lost with decadence, a cycle that Plato uses to reflect on politics and ethics. In fact, many modern scholars have insisted that the story of Atlantis has the typical structure of Platonic teaching. Atlantis, in that context, would be just a dark mirror of Athens, a city that had everything but fell because it lost its way. However, if we settle for understanding Atlantis as an allegory, the video would end here, but the adventure is just beginning. There is a phrase often used by those who study nature. These men and women never tire of repeating that the sea has a memory. It's a memory that isn't expressed with words, but with submerged ruins, dead languages, and fragmented stories that survive in the form of myth. If you scratch the shiny surface of the Platonic story, you start to feel that maybe at the bottom of the Atlantis myth, there isn't just philosophy, but a blurry reflection of something that really happened. An ancient tragedy buried under centuries of water, lava, and oblivion. Some believe Atlantis, though symbolic, may have been inspired by a real civilization that faced a similarly terrible fate. The ancient world was full of catastrophes, some so enormous that the memory of them seems to have become embedded in the cultural DNA of humanity. It's no coincidence that almost all civilizations have spoken of a great flood. A divine punishment came from the sky and destroyed all. From the Epic of Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia, to the story of Noah in the Bible, including the tales of Manu in India or the ancient myths about lakes that swallowed entire villages, the pattern is always the same: water as judgment, as cleansing, as beginning and end. In the heart of the Aegean Sea, a silent giant may be the cause of one of history's greatest cataclysms. The eruption of Thera, now known as Santorini, was an island shaped like a ring, a volcanic caldera surrounded by water. About 3,600 years ago, what everyone feared happened there. The volcano erupted, shaking the earth and covering everything in ash. It wasn't an ordinary eruption. It was one of the most violent in geological history. The explosion destroyed a large part of the island, generated a tsunami several meters high that devastated the coast of Crete and darkened the skies for weeks. All these consequences, as later reconstructed, were seen from different parts of the map. In this way, the effects themselves were global. The atmosphere changed, and crops for miles and miles around were affected. Animals that depended on the crops perished, as did entire families. Low visibility caused ships to get lost and vanish forever. The coastal cities were flooded, and an entire civilization, the Minoan, began its slow collapse. Displacement of them. The Minoans matched everything Plato described about Atlantis. Refined, traders, engineers, and they had a very deep connection with the ocean currents. They had labyrinthine palaces like Knossos, art full of color and movement, advanced piping and drainage systems, and an economy based on the sea. They were not brutal conquerors. It was apparently a culture that thrived in balance, at least until the volcano decided to put an end to the dynasty. The idea that Atlantis was a distorted account of the Minoan civilization's fall has gained support among archaeologists and historians. Maybe Plato or his Egyptian sources heard distant echoes of that destruction, an island empire that disappeared by fire and sea. Maybe what reached him was a legend, a rumor reconstructed from cultural fragments that survived on the margins of history. But there's a problem. Tyre is in the Mediterranean, and Atlantis, according to Plato, was beyond the Pillars of Hercules, that is, outside the world known to the Greeks, in the Atlantic where the sea opened toward infinity. Was it perhaps a translation error, a geographical fusion? Or could it be that there was more than one civilization that collapsed and their stories became intertwined? The other major anomaly is in time. Plato places the fall of Atlantis in a distant past, 9,000 years before Solon, which would place it, according to our calculations, around 9,600 before Christ, a date unthinkable for such an advanced civilization. Back then, humanity was just emerging from the Ice Age, and there was no writing, no cities, and no metals. We were hunter-gatherers, living in caves or huts and leaving our mark with paintings. However, it's also fair to remember that cracks often appear in the official chronology. Sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey have shown that our ideas about when civilization began might be wrong. There, on a hill forgotten for millennia, stand megalithic structures that defy all knowledge. Structures that still spark debates about who built them and why. There are also the submerged ruins of cities like Pavlopetri off the coast of Greece, considered the oldest known in the world, or the ancient Yonaguni structures in Japan, which some say belong to a civilization lost to geological changes. What if there were civilizations before what we know? What if Plato's account isn't as wrong as it seems? History relies on evidence, not hypotheses, and there are still no remains of Atlantis. There are no submerged ruins with inscriptions, no columns, no temples dedicated to Poseidon, no tablets with the names of kings. They're just coincidences, striking ones but still coincidences. Still, many researchers believe something happened. Not with the literary magnitude of Atlantis perhaps, but with enough weight to leave an echo in the memory and cultural heritage of humanity. Could it all be from one or more ancient catastrophes that wiped out peoples, with their history distorted over centuries by word of mouth? Along these lines, there are those who point to a particular event as the trigger for all the cataclysms. The Worm Glaciation, the last great ice age that dominated part of the northern hemisphere for tens of thousands of years, ended approximately 11,700 years ago. This period marked one of the most abrupt and significant climate transitions in the recent history of the Earth. The theory that links the sinking of Atlantis with this climate event suggests that the massive release of fresh water resulting from the melting of ice could have caused geological and climatic changes that led to the disappearance of a large landmass, giving rise to the legend of Atlantis. This hypothesis suggests Atlantis was an island or continent in the Atlantic, whose existence was threatened by the rapid rise in sea level caused by the melting of the enormous ice sheets that covered the planet. The massive melting not only increased the ocean level, but it could also have generated gigantic tsunamis, abrupt land subsidence, and accelerated tectonic movements. The effects of this climatic cataclysm may have been so devastating that they flooded vast coastal areas and submerged human settlements, erasing physical evidence. The temporal coincidence of the end of the Worm Glaciation with the supposed period when Atlantis disappeared reinforces the plausibility that a natural event of such magnitude could have been the origin of the myth. By using paleoclimatic and geological data, this approach links the Atlantis myth to Earth's natural processes, reminding us that the history of humanity is intimately linked to the dynamics of our planet, and that at any moment the balance can be unexpectedly broken. From one, the idea of a vast civilization persisted despite these unknowns. Time passed and its impact, far from diminishing, only grew stronger, even tempting the very Nazis themselves. Throughout the centuries, the name Atlantis survived like a spark about to go out, but always burning. And like any fire almost condemned, it only needed oxygen to burn again. That oxygen came with the Renaissance. When Europe began to rediscover the classical texts, Plato began to circulate again, and with him, the story of Atlantis. The idea of a super advanced civilization that was ultimately destroyed suddenly became an appealing story, deserving greater emphasis and exploration. In fact, the myth took on a new form in the 19th century. It happened thanks to a man who was not a philosopher or historian, but a politician and amateur writer. Ignatius Donnelly was a congressman in the United States, a populist with the vocation of a prophet. In 1882, he published a book that would become the modern Bible of the myth Atlantis, the antediluvian world. There, using intuition, selective archaeological data, and some imagination, Donnelly claimed that Atlantis not only existed, but was the mother of all known ancient civilizations. Egypt, Sumer, the Olmec culture, Scandinavian mythology, even the Hindu scriptures. Everything, Donnelly said, originated from Atlantis. His arguments were weak, but they had something stronger than logic: the ability to amaze. In a time when Darwinism was beginning to strip humanity of its sacred protagonism, Atlantis seemed like a consolation, like a story that put us back at the center of the world. But Donnelly was not the only one. His book inspired a generation of occultists, mystics, and self-taught archaeologists who saw in Atlantis more than just a continent, and took it as a symbol of humanity's lost origin. Atlantis started blending with racial, religious, and esoteric ideas in that environment. It began to appear in theosophy treatises, in spiritualism sessions, in adventure novels, in pseudoscientific lectures, and in pamphlets that today would be labeled as conspiratorial. It was a real craze that would give the whole matter new nuances and angles that would survive to this day. Right there, in that fertile and slippery ground, the myth was distorted to the consumer's liking. Atlantis could be whatever you wanted it to be. It was a kind of void that could be filled with any kind of speculation. All kinds of theories were gaining ground, just a few bits of context, some connections as virtuous as they were random, and suddenly everything took on unexpected dimensions. One of the most disturbing cases was the Third Reich. Heinrich Himmler, architect of the Nazi occult apparatus, was convinced that the Aryans descended from an ancient Atlantean race. According to his vision, Atlantis was the home of a pure, spiritual, and advanced humanity, destroyed by its contact with inferior peoples. Using that twisted mythology, he led expeditions to Tibet, the Andes, and the Arctic to find evidence of the supposed lost race. The myth, once again, was transformed into a political tool and an ideological excuse, supported by an archaeology that relied more on imagined intuitions than on concrete studies. Not everything was controlled by totalitarian regimes. As we mentioned, esotericism found in Atlantis a very peculiar way to express its ideas.
And forbidden revelations.
There was a moment in the late 19th and early 20th centuries when the myth of Atlantis stopped belonging to history and became part of other doctrines. On the rise. At that point, not only archaeologists searched for it, mediums, mystics, prophets, and self-proclaimed enlightened ones did too. And what they found, according to their claims, was not a lost continent, but a secret hidden deep within the human spirit. Yelena Petrovna Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical Society and born in Russia in 1831, was the key figure in this appropriation of the myth. Blavatsky claimed to have traveled through Egypt, Tibet, and India, and to have received teachings from ascended masters. Higher entities revealed hidden truths to her about humanity's origin and destiny. In her major works, Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, she created a vast cosmogony with Atlantis at its center. According to Blavatsky, the fourth root race, she said, was the Atlantean. A people of great spiritual and technological power who fell due to arrogance, moral decline, and misuse of occult energies. To the woman, Atlantis wasn't a myth but a hidden history. Atlantis, in her vision, had not only existed, it had been the battlefield of cosmic forces, of conflicts between the divine and the demonic. Its inhabitants, hybrids of gods and humans, were magicians, scientists, and warriors. Some used their gifts for good, others to control and destroy. According to her texts, the cataclysm of the civilization had not only been natural, but karmic. The Atlanteans had misused their psychic powers and had been victims of a cosmic cleansing that was necessary to restore balance. These ideas deeply influenced figures like Annie Besant and Rudolf Steiner, who developed their own versions of theosophy and Western esotericism. Steiner, founder of anthroposophy, claimed that the Atlanteans were telepaths who did not speak with words, but with mental images, and that the matter of their world was not as dense as it is today. These esoteric visions turned Atlantis into a symbol of what we lost when we became rational beings. Thus, the Golden Age lagged spiritually, not technologically. Instead of machines, the Atlanteans would have handled subtle energies, vibrations, mental and magnetic fields, and portals. Fallen, not from ambition, but from losing connection to the divine. This narrative became mixed with extremely dangerous racial ideas. Both Blavatsky and her followers believed that some modern races were direct descendants of the Atlanteans, while others were degenerate remnants. This pseudo-spirituality concealed racist hierarchies disguised as metaphysical evolution. As shown in the previous chapter, Nazi ideologues adopted these ideas and used the myth to justify their supremacist delusions. But occultism did not stop. In the first half of the 20th century, an even more peculiar figure appeared. Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, from Virginia Cayce. He would enter hypnotic trances where he supposedly channeled information from past lives and the Akashic records. A cosmic library holding all that was, is, and will be. According to his visions, Atlantis was an advanced civilization located in the Atlantic, near what is now the Bahamas. He mentioned crystal temples, clean energy, flying machines, and alternative medicine. Cayce claimed that many of his contemporaries were reincarnations of Atlanteans and that shortly before the year 2000 part of that civilization would emerge from the bottom of the ocean. One of his most notable announcements was that underwater structures would be found near Bimini, Bahamas. When in 1960 stone formations were found at the site known as Bimini Road, his followers took it as proof that his visions were real. Science was skeptical. Geological studies pointed to natural formations, not artificial ones. It's worth clarifying that these studies also received several criticisms, so once again, uncertainty is the only thing that stands as a definitive consensus. In our days, the echoes of these ideas are still alive. New Age movements, theories of memories from other lives, spiritual channels on social networks. They all evoke Atlantis as a luminous and tragic origin, a glorious past that we must remember to activate our spiritual DNA, awaken planetary consciousness, or heal the traumas of the sinking. For those movements, Atlantis was no longer a place, but a symbol of the higher self we could reclaim if we overcame the transition. A classic trauma that still haunts us. And while archaeologists explored the ocean floor with sonar and geologists analyzed rocks in the Caribbean, others began searching for Atlantis. In dreams, in trances, and in the whispers of invisible entities. Maybe the most interesting thing about all this isn't whether Atlantis existed or not, but how a myth can mutate so much, take on so many forms, fit into so many agendas, survive centuries of cultural change, and still seem relevant. For instance, Atlantis would end up being connected with the mythical Bermuda Triangle. And by the way, let me tell you that we've already made a video about the Bermuda Triangle on this channel, so if you want it, look for it, because it's around here somewhere.
Subtitled by J. N. Coyle. Subtitled J. N. Coyle.
In the 20th century, few figures did more to popularize the mystery of Atlantis than Charles Berlitz. If you want to learn more about this peculiar character, watch our video on Roswell and the Bermuda Triangle. Connecting the dots, you'll be able to see how this guy seems to show up tirelessly in the creation of all those topics that fascinate us today. In 1974, Berlitz published The Mystery of Atlantis, a book that combined accounts of expeditions, testimonies, ancient maps, and bold theories to argue that Atlantis not only existed, but was located in various parts of the Atlantic Ocean, from the Azores to the Bahamas, and even extending toward Latin America. For Berlitz, Atlantis was an advanced civilization that had mastered technologies unknown to humanity today. He claimed the inhabitants knew about free energy and flying machines, but those abilities vanished after the island sank. This idea resonated deeply with an audience eager to find alternative explanations for human progress and the mystery of ancient civilizations. Berlitz is best remembered for linking the mystery of Atlantis to the Bermuda Triangle enigma. He proposed that the unexplained disappearances of ships and planes in that area could be linked to remnants or residual energies from Atlantis, and even to forgotten technologies that were still operating beneath the waters. By accident, Berlitz, far from being a traditional academic researcher, adopted an accessible and captivating narrative style, mixing science, speculation, and legend. This earned him both fervent admirers and harsh criticism from the scientific community, which accused him of lacking rigor and promoting pseudoscience. Despite the controversies, Berlitz contributed to making Atlantis more than just a simple philosophical tale, turning it into a massive cultural phenomenon. His books were translated into many languages, sold worldwide, and influenced television documentaries and tourism in places like the Bahamas and Azores. However, his theories were also a clear reflection of the rise of New Age culture and the search for the occult during the second half of the 20th century. Berlitz knew how to capitalize on the spirit of the times when fascination with the paranormal, the inexplicable, and the esoteric reached its peak. Although many of his claims lack concrete evidence and have been debunked by experts, the legacy of Charles Berlitz lives on in the way Atlantis is perceived today. Something similar can be said about another Charles. We're talking about Charles Hapgood, a man whose ideas caught the attention of many people. Charles Hapgood, a 20th century American historian and geologist, is a key figure for understanding a particular line of thought about Atlantis. A line that mixes geology, alternative archaeology, and unconventional theories about the history of the Earth. Hapgood gained notoriety mainly for his hypothesis of Earth crust displacement, or Earth crust displacement. According to this idea, the Earth's outer layer, the crust, would shift significantly in a relatively short period of time, moving entire continents and radically changing the planet's geography. This theory was presented with some support, although not general acceptance, by scientists and explorers. It even drew Albert Einstein's attention, who wrote a foreword to one of his books. The hypothesis of cataclysmic pole shift is a pseudoscientific claim that there have been geologically rapid recent changes in the Earth's axis of rotation. Changes that have caused calamities such as floods and tectonic events in record time. For Hapgood, this phenomenon would explain the sudden disappearance of ancient civilizations and the existence of inexplicable archaeological remains in places that, according to current geography, would be impossible. Here, Atlantis is seen not just as a myth, but as the remains of a continent that once existed in a different location, and that it was lost or destroyed by catastrophic changes in the Earth's crust. In his best-known works, like Earth's Shifting Crust, Hapgood suggested that Atlantis could have been a continent located in the Atlantic area, whose remains might be scattered and submerged due to these shifts. He also used this theory to explain how advanced civilizations, such as the Egyptian or Mesoamerican, might have inherited knowledge from earlier vanished peoples. Did Atlantis ever connect multiple civilizations? Is it today a puzzle scattered all over the globe? Although the modern scientific community considers the rapid displacement of the Earth's crust, as proposed by Hapgood, it lacks solid foundations and contradicts plate tectonics. His work stimulated an important debate about the possibility of sudden geological events that could have affected human history. No less interesting is the idea held by many that Atlantis may have continued to appear before our eyes, only in the form of islands. Ghosts?
And the mysterious ones?
Throughout history, the ocean has been a blank canvas where countless myths have been drawn about hidden lands, islands that appear and disappear, and secret worlds that defy known geography. In this mosaic of legends, Atlantis is not alone. It shares its mystery with tales of phantom islands that have intrigued sailors, cartographers, and explorers for centuries. Antilla Island is one of the most enigmatic, appearing in ancient maps and maritime accounts since the 16th century. Described as a large island located in the Atlantic Ocean, Antilla was marked on Spanish and Portuguese nautical charts as a reference point for transatlantic routes. However, as exploration advanced and more accurate cartography took prominence, the island began to be erased from maps as if it had never existed. This phenomenon of phantom islands is not unique, but Antilla stands out because its disappearance occurred in the same region where the ancients placed Atlantis, past the Pillars of Hercules among Europe, Africa, and America. Some historians and mystery scholars suggest Antilla may be a remnant or confusion with the Atlantis myth, maybe in spoken and written accounts. The memory of a great vanished island gradually turned into the idea of islands that emerge and sink, impossible islands that hold secrets and treasures. But the story of Antilla Island also has a more concrete and puzzling aspect. For centuries, several ships and expeditions reported having sighted land in places where modern maps show no islands. Sailors' testimonies describe rocky shores, mountains, and vegetation, only to lose all trace when returning or getting closer. In an era without global positioning system or satellites, these observations fueled the belief in wandering islands that appear and disappear under the influence of natural phenomena, or according to some, for more mysterious reasons. This phenomenon connects with the Atlantean myth on several levels. First, because Atlantis itself was described as an island that disappeared beneath the sea. Second, the idea of territories emerging and sinking implies a more dynamic, fluid planet where geography isn't fixed. In more recent times, explorers and scientists have tried to find a natural explanation for these phantom islands. Phenomena such as sea mirages, temporary accumulations of sediment, or underwater volcanic eruptions that create ephemeral emerging land have been proposed. Still, no clear explanation has solved the mystery. While science advances and maps become more precise, stories of lost islands and Atlantis still sail in our imagination, reminding us that the ocean still holds its secrets beyond what is visible. But let's set aside these phantom islands for now and focus on something more concrete. Let's discuss people who dedicate themselves to sound hunting, submerged ruins. In the story of Atlantis, every expedition, every submerged stone, every satellite image that shows something too symmetrical doesn't solve the enigma, it expands it. Starting in the 20th century as occultism created a metaphysical Atlantis, others searched for it using different tools. While visions and trances were the cornerstone for believers, the more skeptical armed themselves with sonars, maps, and submarines. Though answers were absent for decades, moments, places, and discoveries still shook even the most rational. In 2001, a Canadian company, Advanced Digital Communications, reported having detected what appeared to be regular structures at a depth of 600 meters off the coast of Cuba using sonar. These were supposed walls, pyramids, and geometric shapes. International media covered the discovery, sparking many hypotheses. But so far, today, a thorough exploration of the site has never been carried out. The images are scarce, the data is confusing, and the Cuban government remained silent. In 2005, Marc-André Gaucher, a marine geologist at the European University Institute of the Sea in Lausanne, France, published an analysis in the journal Geology. Espartel, a submerged island west of the Strait of Gibraltar, may have been destroyed by a powerful earthquake and tsunami around 12,000 years ago. Another site that generated the most fascination was the Andalusia coast in Spain, specifically the Doñana Marshes, south of Cadiz. In 2009, a team led by researcher Richard Froden identified, using light detection and ranging technology and satellite image analysis, a series of circular structures submerged in the mud. Froden presented a bold theory. Those formations were the remains of Atlantis, or rather of a city built in its image. After its destruction by survivors who arrived in southern Europe, the scientific community responded coldly. Many of those circles were Roman salt pans, others simple geological anomalies. But something persisted in those images. The proportions, the lines, the idea of a city organized in concentric rings looked too much like Plato's descriptions to be ignored. The question isn't just whether there are ruins under the sea. The real question is, how many? From what we're starting to discover through satellites, sonar and depth scans, a good part of our history is underwater. In the last 10,000 years, sea levels have risen by 120 meters. Entire cities, if they existed near the coasts, like most ancient settlements, would now be irretrievably submerged. Examples like the already mentioned Dwarka in India, Pavlopetri in Greece, Port Royal in Jamaica, or the structures off Yonaguni in Japan show that the seafloor holds secrets. Some are confirmed, others still debated, but they all share something. They remind us human history is more fragile than we realize, and what we call evidence is only the iceberg's visible part. There are so few certainties that some even talk about Atlantis being located in South America, Atlantis in America. For centuries, the New World has been a breeding ground for speculation about the location of Atlantis, beyond the traditional Atlantic. Numerous researchers, writers, and enthusiasts have suggested that Atlantis may have existed in the lands we now know as America, connecting the legend to pre-Columbian civilizations and indigenous tales. As we have already explained, some theories point to the Yucatan Peninsula area and the Caribbean Basin as the epicenter, Atlante. Some argue that natural disasters like earthquakes and tsunamis may have sunk large areas of land, inspiring myths of lost islands. The connection between these events and Mayan culture, known for advanced astronomy and sudden collapse, fuels speculation of a possible link to the Atlanteans. On the other hand, some researchers have suggested that certain cultures, such as the Incas, might have inherited knowledge from an older and more advanced civilization. Andean myths about the Tahuantinsuyu, or lands lost beneath the waters, are reminiscent of the Atlantean legend. Furthermore, the discovery of megalithic structures and astronomical alignments in places like Tiwanaku or Pumapunku raises questions about the possible continuity or influence of a mother culture. These theories often cite similar indigenous myths about great floods and global disasters. Various American ethnic groups recount in their traditions the existence of lands that sank and the arrival of knowledge or special skills from peoples who disappeared into the water. This convergence of stories reinforces the idea of a shared event interpreted as the end of Atlantis. However, the scientific community is skeptical about this hypothesis. The lack of conclusive archaeological evidence, the absence of unequivocal material remains, and the fragmentary nature of the myths make it difficult to validate a direct connection. Additionally, pre-Columbian cultures have documented origins and unique developments that do not necessarily require influence from an outside civilization. In 1999, a British researcher named Jim Allen proposed one of the most surprising and controversial theories about the possible location of Atlantis. Not under the Atlantic Ocean, nor off the coast of Europe, but in the heart of South America, on the Bolivian plateau, more precisely in the area of Pampaulagas, in the department of Oruro, a dry, high, arid region with no access to the sea. For most, it's impossible. For Allen, it's the key. His hypothesis begins with an observation. According to him, the description Plato gives of the rectangular Atlantean plain matches the shape of the Bolivian plateau, a large plateau south of Lake Popo. The Greek philosopher described a huge, perfectly rectangular plain bordered by mountains to the north and south. Allen found in this Andean region a surprising similarity with those dimensions and that geographical arrangement. Allen links his discovery to the ancient Andean legend of the Desaguadero at the peak of this theory. Describes a city punished by the gods and submerged underwater. For Allen, the symbolic coincidence with the Platonic account is more than a metaphor. It is proof that the Greek myth originates from a pre-Columbian tradition, transformed and brought to Europe over the centuries. The researcher also added other elements to support his thesis. On one hand, he mentioned the results of the Acacor expedition carried out at Lake Titicaca, where they were searching for traces of a submerged city. A search that, although inconclusive, added new layers to the Andean mystery. Alan revisited the work of controversial Austrian archaeologist Arthur Poznanki. He had assigned the ruins of Tiwanaku an age of more than 15,000 years, much earlier than what is accepted by official archaeology. For Alan, Tiwanaku was not only part of Atlantis, but it could have been one of its last strongholds after the catastrophe. His hypothesis attracted attention, press, and curiosity. However, it didn't take long before specialists began to question his arguments. Bolivian archaeologist Antonio Sagarnaga and others strongly criticized Alan's interpretations. He said the circles of Pampa Ulaga are natural geological formations, not man-made. The British researcher mixes elements from various cultures and eras without proper methodology, resulting in an attractive but weak narrative. Criticism Alan's theory continues to generate debates. What if Plato's account wasn't referring to the Mediterranean world but was actually a distorted echo of a much older story, passed down by travelers, forgotten sailors, or collective memory? What if Atlantis was not a sunken European empire, but the Greek version of an Andean kingdom destroyed by a climate disaster, such as rapid melting after the Worm glaciation? There's something alluring about the idea that among the salt flats, lagoons, and winds of the high plateau, the eroded traces of a civilization as advanced as, tragic maybe, the mystery isn't submerged in the sea but dissolved in the heights, among volcanic rock and dust. Ancestral from a continent, like Atlantis, overlooked and later found by Western empires. Ultimately, the theories that place Atlantis in America highlight the universality of the myth and its ability to adapt to different cultural and geographical contexts. Because searching for Atlantis rarely yields what you expect, but you always discover something, often an anomaly, a doubt, or a flaw in the official story. That's why it's not hard to understand why it has had such a deep impact on popular culture. Atlantis left academic and philosophical circles a long time ago to become a global cultural icon. An inexhaustible source of inspiration that has crossed the boundaries of time and artistic disciplines. From literature to cinema, music, and video games, its image has been repeatedly reinvented to reflect each era's fears and desires. In the literature of Atlantis, the pages of authors like Julio Verne and H.P. Lovecraft resurface, who transformed it into a space for scientific exploration and cosmic horror, respectively. Verne, with his adventurous and scientific spirit, depicted Atlantis as a realm of lost technology, while Lovecraft used it to show humanity's insignificance before ancient, mysterious forces. Cinema brought it to the big screen with various interpretations, from Atlantis as a lost utopia to the dystopian vision of an arrogant civilization doomed to disappear. Movies like Atlantis, The Lost Empire by Disney, or darker productions have shaped collective perception, blending elements of fantasy, science fiction, and mythology. Music has also paid tribute to the legend, with compositions that evoke the melancholy and mystery of a submerged world. Bands and artists have used Atlantis as a metaphor to explore themes such as loss, hope, and the search for meaning. In video games, Atlantis appears as a setting for adventures and mysteries, inviting players to explore submerged ruins, discover ancient technologies, and face supernatural forces. This survival in popular culture shows both fascination with the lost past and the human need to connect with something greater, a mystery that transcends history and science. In this way, Atlantis continues to sail in the unconscious, reminding us that even though time has erased it from the maps, it can never make it disappear from our inner compass. Thank you. Atlantis is more than a lost place. It's a symbol that has transcended eras, cultures, and disciplines. Its story has been reinterpreted, distorted, and reimagined, but never forgotten. In it, our hopes and fears converge, our doubts about progress and downfall, our interest in a lost paradise, and the fear of repeating the mistakes of the past. During global crises, the myth of Atlantis resonates strongly with humanity. It is a call to responsibility, to take care of our planet, and to preserve what could disappear beneath the waves of time and indifference. Maybe we'll never find Atlantis, but in searching, we gain something greater, the power to question and reshape our own destiny. Atlantis endures, not as a sunken city, but as a lasting beacon, lighting the horizon of the unknown. inviting us to sail beyond what is visible toward the mysteries that still await to be unveiled. Today, new theories suggest that perhaps Atlantis lies behind the walls of Antarctica. Or is it possible that the Hollow Earth theory is actually the description of someone who reached the very core of the Atlantean civilization? As we can see, it's impossible to cover all the possibilities, especially because new ones are always emerging. The urge to recover what was lost is more than just wanting to find ruins. It's nostalgia for a civilization that may never have existed, but we feel it should have. Nostalgia can be stronger than any evidence. Atlantis is a canvas where each generation projects its fear of decline, often unconsciously. Is that what makes it more real than any ruin, maybe deep down? We want to find Atlantis, to try to understand what happened to it and thus avoid our next great extinction.